John here from bootcamp.com. Welcome to another lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to be taking a look at the neurons which are going to comprise the descending pathways. Now, there's two neurons, and we refer to it as a two-neuron chain. There's an upper motor neuron and a lower motor neuron. You can take a pause right here and take a look at the details of today's lesson, but let's just get started. So in order to understand the descending motor pathways, we need to understand the neurons that are involved in them. And there's two neurons. We have an upper motor neuron and a lower motor neuron. Now, the upper motor neuron, as the name would suggest, is going to be found in higher cortical areas. These are the cell bodies of these are going to be located in the motor cortex or the brainstem. So you can see we have this purple neuron right here coming from the primary motor cortex where motor movements are going to be planned. This is then going to descend down through the brain and the brainstem through the spinal cord, and in this illustration, it decussates, which means it crosses over. Then going to continue to descend down the specific spinal tract for that type of movement, and it's going to synapse in the ventral horn of the spinal cord at a specific level for the muscle that it's going to try to control. And where it synapses is it synapses on these lower motor neurons. So our lower motor neurons, as the name suggests, are going to be found lower in the central nervous system. And these are going to be found at the level of the spinal cord for which that neuron is innervating that particular muscle. So you can see we have this orange neuron here in the ventral horn of the spinal cord at a specific level. Let's call this one the cervical level. And it's going to exit out of the ventral horn through the ventral roots down through the spinal nerve, and it's going to go into the anterior or the posterior rami to innervate that specific muscle. So the axons of those lower motor neurons, as they leave, they're going to go to the muscle, and they're going to synapse at the muscle at that neuromuscular junction where acetylcholine is released to stimulate that muscle to get it to contract. So we have our upper motor neurons here in purple, and we have our lower motor neuron down here in orange. Now, one thing I forgot to mention with the lower motor neurons, they're not always found in the spinal cord. They can actually also be found in the brainstem. And this is specifically when we're talking about the muscles or the cell bodies for the neurons, for the muscles, which control the muscles of the face. So the muscles of mastication, the muscles of facial expression, and so on. These are going to be coming out of cranial nerves. So these cranial nerves, of course, are going to be found in our brainstem. So the lower motor neurons for these pathways are going to be found here throughout the brainstem. So building off of that, in the brainstem, the lower motor neurons are going to be the cranial nerve nuclei. So let's say you have your facial nucleus, which provides motor innervation to the facial nerve and the muscles of facial expression. That cranial nerve nucleus is going to house those lower motor neurons. And the axons from these cranial nerve nuclei, these are going to exit, and these are actually what form the cranial nerves. So axons form the cranial nerves, which are going to travel to the target muscle. So let's say it's your frontalis muscle. Those cranial nerve axons are going to exit, form that cranial nerve, and that is what is going to go and stimulate that frontalis muscle. Now, these cranial nerve nuclei are going to be found throughout the brainstem, but the majority of the ones that we're going to be focusing on in later lessons are going to be found in the medulla, and this is because we have a lot of motor nuclei in here which are going to go off and create those cranial nerves which innervate the muscles. Now, we also have lower motor neurons found in the spinal cord. And as I mentioned, these are going to be found in the ventral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord right here and right here. So as a neuron or an upper motor neuron descends down, it's going to come out and it's going to synapse on a lower motor neuron found here in our ventral horn, and then from the ventral horn, those are going to leave out through those ventral roots.